pets. We've always had pets. And so whenever you lose someone or you go through immense grief, you have a choice to either turn that grief into purpose or let that grief absolutely consume you to the point where you are worth nothing to anybody. And you, like you mentioned earlier to the young lady who asked about, feeling.
Nobody expected this. For months, the battle between Candace Owens and Erika has divided audiences, sparked endless debates, and left millions wondering what was really happening behind closed doors. But just when everyone thought the story had reached its peak, Megyn Kelly stepped forward with details that are sending shockwaves through the internet. And what she revealed changes everything. According to Megyn, there were conversations taking place that the public never saw. Discussions happening away from the cameras. Phone calls, private messages, attempts at mediation, and efforts to stop a conflict that was spiraling out of control. The picture being painted publicly may not have been the complete story after all. What makes this revelation so explosive is that Megyn wasn't just an observer. She wasn't sitting on the sidelines watching the drama unfold like everyone else. She was right in the middle of it. She was talking to people from both sides. She heard things most viewers never heard. And now, she's finally speaking about what was really happening behind the scenes. But that's only the beginning. Because as Megyn started sharing her side of the story, attention quickly turned toward another major figure in this controversy, Ben Shapiro. Suddenly, old disagreements, private conversations, and public confrontations began resurfacing. Questions that many believed had already been answered were being asked all over again. Why was there so much pressure surrounding this situation? Why were friendships being tested? And why did so many powerful voices seem desperate to control the narrative? The deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. What started as a dispute involving Candace Owens and Erika has evolved into something much bigger, a story about loyalty, influence, friendship, and the unseen battles taking place behind some of the biggest names in conservative media. Every new detail seems to raise even more questions than answers. And perhaps the most shocking part of all, Megyn Kelly still isn't fully taking sides. Despite everything she knows, despite everything she has witnessed firsthand, she continues to walk a line that has left supporters and critics equally stunned. Some say it's wisdom. Others say it's strategy. But before you decide for yourself, you need to hear the story that has everyone talking. Because once the full timeline comes together, you may never look at this controversy the same way again. To understand why Megyn Kelly's latest comments have generated so much attention, you have to go back to the beginning of a controversy that has gradually transformed from a simple disagreement into one of the most talked about conflicts in conservative media. What many people see today is a feud. What they don't see is the complicated web of friendships, alliances, loyalties, and personal relationships that existed long before any public arguments ever erupted. For years, Megyn Kelly built a reputation as someone willing to challenge powerful figures regardless of political affiliation. Whether people agreed with her or not, supporters often praised her for maintaining an independent voice. That reputation became especially important as divisions inside conservative media began growing wider and wider. At the center of those divisions stood several major personalities. Candace Owens had become one of the most influential commentators in the country. Her willingness to challenge accepted narratives earned her a fiercely loyal audience. Supporters viewed her as fearless, someone unafraid to ask difficult questions even when those questions made powerful people uncomfortable. On another side was Ben Shapiro, one of the most recognizable conservative voices in America. Through years of commentary, debates, and media appearances, he had built a massive following and significant influence within conservative circles. Then there was Charlie Kirk, a figure who played a major role in shaping the modern conservative movement through Turning Point USA. His influence stretched far beyond social media, touching activists, donors, media personalities, and political leaders alike. And standing beside him was Erika Kirk. For most of the public, Erika wasn't viewed primarily as a political figure. She was known as Charles's wife, someone who largely remained outside the daily political battles that dominated headlines. That changed dramatically following Charles's tragic death. Almost overnight, Erika found herself thrust into an environment filled with speculation, scrutiny, and relentless public attention. As emotions ran high, questions started appearing online. Some people simply wanted answers. Others believed there were deeper issues worth examining. And that is where Candace Owens entered the picture. Candace began discussing various aspects of the situation, asking questions that quickly generated enormous attention. Supporters argued she was pursuing accountability. Critics accused her of going too far. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable: the conversation was growing larger every day. Soon, social media platforms became battlegrounds. Every statement generated thousands of reactions. Every interview became headline news. Every new claim sparked another round of debate. What started as a discussion evolved into a full-scale media firestorm. And right in the middle of that storm sat Megyn Kelly. Unlike many commentators who immediately chose sides, Megyn appeared hesitant to fully commit herself to either camp. She openly disagreed with certain claims being made. At the same time, she also expressed discomfort with efforts to completely silence discussion. That position placed her in a difficult situation. Supporters of one side wanted stronger condemnation. Supporters of the other side wanted stronger support. Instead, Megyn continued trying to navigate a middle path. According to her later comments, she wasn't merely observing events from a distance. Behind the scenes, she was reportedly communicating with people involved in the conflict. Conversations were happening away from cameras. Discussions were taking place that audiences knew nothing about. Those private interactions would eventually become some of the most controversial aspects of the entire story. As tensions increased, another major factor complicated matters even further: growing divisions within conservative media itself. Disagreements were emerging over foreign policy. Disagreements were emerging over political strategy. Disagreements were emerging over the future direction of the movement. Friendships that once seemed unbreakable suddenly appeared strained. Longtime allies found themselves on opposite sides of public debates. And nowhere was that tension more visible than in the increasingly complicated relationships involving Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, and Candace Owens. What made the situation particularly fascinating was that these weren't random internet personalities arguing online. These were some of the biggest voices in political media. Millions of people followed their shows. Millions more watched clips of their debates. Their words influenced conversations across the country. Every disagreement carried enormous weight. According to Megyn's account, tensions eventually escalated to the point where personal relationships became intertwined with public disputes. Arguments that appeared political on the surface began affecting friendships behind closed doors. The lines between professional disagreements and personal loyalty started to blur. That is often when conflicts become most dangerous. Because once loyalty enters the equation, every disagreement feels personal. Every criticism feels like betrayal. Every public statement carries consequences beyond what viewers can see. As the controversy continued expanding, many observers began asking the same question. Was this really about the original dispute anymore? Or had the conflict evolved into something much larger? The more details emerged, the harder that question became to answer. What appeared straightforward from a distance suddenly looked incredibly complicated up close. Individuals who publicly disagreed were reportedly still communicating privately. People accused of being enemies continued maintaining certain relationships. Alliances shifted. Narratives changed. And every new revelation seemed to uncover another hidden layer beneath the surface. Then came the moment that reignited everything. Megyn Kelly began speaking more openly about what she had witnessed during those turbulent months. She discussed private conversations. She described pressures she allegedly faced. She revealed details about attempts to broker peace between opposing sides. And perhaps most importantly, she challenged the simplified version of events that many people had accepted as fact. Suddenly, old questions returned. Old controversies resurfaced. And audiences started looking at the entire situation through a completely different lens. Because if Megyn's version of events is accurate, then what happened behind the scenes may be far more complicated than anyone realized. And that realization sets the stage for the explosive conflict that followed, a conflict involving damaged friendships, public confrontations, and revelations that would leave audiences stunned. At first, most people believed this was a simple disagreement. Candace Owens was asking questions. Erika Kirk wanted the controversy to stop. Megyn Kelly was attempting to remain neutral. And Ben Shapiro was defending what he believed was right. At least, that's how the story appeared from the outside. But the deeper people looked, the more cracks started appearing in that narrative. Because according to Megyn Kelly, what was happening behind the scenes was very different from what audiences were seeing on camera. And that's where the real conflict begins. The public battle was centered on Candace Owens and her investigation. Every day seemed to bring new discussions, new theories, and new arguments. Supporters praised Candace for refusing to back down. Critics accused her of crossing lines that should never have been crossed. The pressure surrounding the situation became enormous. Commentators were being asked to choose sides. Media personalities were expected to publicly condemn one camp or the other. Neutrality was becoming almost impossible. For Megyn Kelly, that created a problem. She had relationships with multiple people involved. She knew Candace. She knew Erika. She knew Ben. She knew many of the figures operating behind the scenes. And according to her later statements, she wasn't interested in becoming another soldier in someone else's war. At first, she tried to stay above the conflict. She expressed disagreement with certain claims. She expressed sympathy for people caught in the middle. Most importantly, she attempted to avoid turning the entire situation into a public spectacle. But then something changed. The pressure intensified. And suddenly Megyn found herself becoming part of the story. What she later described was startling. Instead of simply disagreeing about the facts, certain individuals allegedly wanted her to publicly take a stronger position against Candace Owens. Not privately. Publicly. The distinction mattered. Because once someone publicly condemns another commentator, the relationship often becomes impossible to repair. Megyn wasn't comfortable doing that. She believed she could disagree with Candace without completely destroying her. That position might sound reasonable. But in the middle of an emotionally charged controversy, reason often becomes the first casualty. Every statement was being analyzed. Every interview was being scrutinized. Every silence was being interpreted as support. And every refusal to fully condemn someone became controversial in its own right. Then came the first major turning point. Megyn began suggesting that the conflict wasn't actually about Erika Kirk anymore. That was the shocking implication. According to her, something much bigger was happening beneath the surface. And if that was true, it changed everything. Because suddenly the focus shifted away from Candace's questions and toward a broader struggle taking place inside conservative media. The names involved weren't small. They were some of the most influential voices in the movement. People with massive audiences. People with significant influence. People capable of shaping national conversations. The controversy was no longer simply about what had been said. It was becoming a battle over loyalty. A battle over influence. A battle over who would control the narrative moving forward. And that's when the Tucker Carlson factor entered the story. Megyn later revealed that disagreements involving Tucker Carlson had already created tension long before many of the public confrontations occurred. She described attempts to maintain friendships across increasingly hostile divisions. She spoke about trying to keep communication alive between people who were growing further apart. But according to her account, those efforts weren't appreciated by everyone. In fact, they may have made her a target. The situation reached a boiling point when public criticism replaced private conversations. That is a moment that often changes everything. Friends can disagree privately for years. But once criticism becomes public, the relationship enters dangerous territory. And that appears to be exactly what happened. Megyn described feeling blindsided. She described watching someone she considered a friend criticize her publicly without first having a direct conversation. To her, that wasn't merely disagreement. It felt personal. The audience saw an argument. Megyn saw a betrayal. And betrayal is a powerful emotion. Because once someone feels betrayed, every previous interaction gets re-examined. Every conversation takes on new meaning. Every action is viewed through a different lens. Suddenly, the entire history of the relationship comes under scrutiny. That's exactly what happened here. Megyn began connecting dots. She started questioning motives. She started wondering whether the public controversy had been used as a tool to accomplish something else entirely. And that realization leads us to the first major twist. Because according to Megyn's version of events, the demands being placed on her weren't really about Erika Kirk. They weren't even primarily about Candace Owens. They were about forcing a choice. Choose this side. Reject that side. End this friendship. Support this position. Draw a line. Pick a camp. And Megyn refused. That refusal became the spark that ignited everything. In today's political environment, many people expect absolute loyalty. They don't want partial agreement. They don't want nuance. They don't want complicated answers. They want total commitment. Megyn wasn't willing to provide it. She continued speaking with people across different factions. She continued maintaining relationships others wanted her to abandon. And according to her, that decision carried consequences. The criticism intensified. Supporters of various camps became increasingly hostile. Online attacks multiplied. Questions about her motives became common. Yet she still refused to fully surrender her independence. That decision shocked many observers. Most people expected her to eventually pick a side. Instead, she kept resisting. The more pressure she faced, the more determined she seemed to become. But while Megyn was defending her independence publicly, another story was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. A story involving Erika Kirk. According to Megyn, Erika wasn't simply sitting back while the controversy raged. She was actively trying to find a way out. Trying to lower tensions. Trying to stop the conflict from escalating even further. That revelation surprised many people. Because the public image of the situation was dramatically different. Online, everything looked like open warfare. Behind the scenes, there were apparently conversations about peace. Attempts at mediation. Efforts to bring opposing sides together. And Megyn claims she became involved in those efforts. Suddenly, her refusal to publicly condemn Candace looked different. Perhaps she wasn't avoiding the issue. Perhaps she was trying to create space for a resolution. If that's true, then much of the criticism directed at her may have been based on incomplete information. But that only creates another question. If peace efforts were happening privately, why did the public conflict continue getting worse? Why did tensions keep escalating? Why did the rhetoric become more aggressive? The answer may lie in the competing interests surrounding the controversy. Because while some people wanted reconciliation, others appeared focused on winning. And winning requires conflict. Winning requires sides. Winning requires enemies. Peace doesn't generate headlines. Conflict does. Nuance doesn't go viral. Drama does. And as the controversy grew larger, the incentives pushing everyone toward confrontation became impossible to ignore. By now, friendships had been damaged. Trust had been broken. Public accusations were flying in every direction. The original controversy was almost becoming secondary to the war that had erupted around it. And just when it seemed impossible for things to become more explosive, another revelation emerged. A revelation that would raise even more questions about what was really happening behind the scenes. Because if Megyn Kelly's account is accurate, then some of the most important conversations in this entire story happened far away from cameras, microphones, and public view. And what allegedly occurred during those private discussions could completely reshape how audiences understand this controversy. But that's where the story takes an even darker and more surprising turn. By this point, the controversy had grown far beyond what anyone originally expected. What started as questions? What became a public dispute? What evolved into a battle over loyalty? Was now turning into something even more explosive. Because the deeper Megyn Kelly looked into the situation, the more she seemed to realize that there were multiple stories unfolding simultaneously. The public saw one version. The people involved were living another. And somewhere between those two realities sat the truth. The pressure surrounding the entire controversy was becoming impossible to ignore. Every interview generated headlines. Every social media post triggered thousands of reactions. Every appearance by Candace Owens, Erika or Megyn Kelly was dissected frame by frame. People weren't simply watching anymore. They were choosing teams. And once that happens, facts often become secondary to emotion. Supporters wanted validation. Critics wanted confirmation. Everyone was searching for evidence that their side had been right all along. That's when Megyn started revealing details that completely changed how many people viewed the conflict. According to her account, Erika had privately reached out seeking help. Not public support. Not media attention. Help. The distinction mattered. Because it suggested something very different from the image being portrayed online. Publicly, the situation looked hopeless. Privately, there were efforts underway to prevent everything from completely collapsing. Megyn claimed she found herself serving as an unofficial bridge between people who no longer trusted each other. That role came with enormous risks. Because mediators rarely make everyone happy. The moment you speak to one side, the other side becomes suspicious. The moment you try to understand someone's perspective, critics accuse you of taking their side. And that appears to be exactly what happened. As Megyn attempted to navigate the situation, criticism intensified from every direction. Some believed she wasn't doing enough. Others believed she was doing too much. Some wanted her to publicly condemn Candace Owens. Others wanted her to fully support Candace's investigation. The middle ground was disappearing. Fast. But the most shocking revelation wasn't about Megyn. It wasn't about Candace. And it wasn't even about Erika. It was about what the controversy itself had become. Because according to Megyn, there were moments when it felt as though the original issue was no longer the focus. The conflict had taken on a life of its own. Entire factions were forming. Old rivalries were resurfacing. Personal grudges were becoming public battles. And every disagreement seemed connected to a larger struggle taking place beneath the surface. The atmosphere inside conservative media was becoming increasingly fractured. People who once appeared united were drifting apart. Long-standing alliances were showing signs of strain. And as tensions rose, every disagreement became magnified. One comment could trigger days of backlash. One interview could spark weeks of debate. One disagreement could end friendships. That's what made Megyn's next revelation so surprising. She suggested that attempts had been made to push her into making a choice she wasn't prepared to make. Not simply expressing an opinion. Making a declaration. Choosing who belonged inside her circle and who didn't. For many observers, that claim was a bombshell. Because it suggested that the battle wasn't merely about facts. It was about loyalty. And loyalty is often far more powerful than ideology. People can disagree politically and remain friends. But when loyalty gets questioned, everything changes. Megyn described feeling increasingly uncomfortable with demands that seemed designed to force her into one camp. She believed it was possible to disagree with someone without destroying them. Possible to challenge ideas without ending relationships. Possible to maintain friendships across ideological divides. Yet that position was becoming harder and harder to defend. Every refusal to fully condemn Candace generated backlash. Every attempt to explain her position generated new criticism. Every effort at neutrality seemed to make both sides angrier. Then came the moment that truly stunned audiences. Megyn openly suggested that some of the harshest attacks against her had little to do with the public explanations being offered. In her view, the conflict wasn't really about protecting Erika. It wasn't really about defending standards. And it wasn't really about demanding accountability. At least not entirely. Instead, she implied there were deeper political and personal divisions driving much of the hostility. That revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Because if she was right, then audiences had been watching only the surface-level conflict. The real battle was happening underneath. A battle involving influence, power, relationships, and competing visions for the future. Suddenly, old confrontations started looking different. Public arguments took on new meaning. Questions that once seemed settled were reopened. People began revisiting interviews, speeches, and statements searching for clues they may have missed. And that's when another shocking detail emerged. Megyn revealed that while the public was demanding louder condemnation and stronger attacks, private conversations were often far more complicated. Individuals who appeared to be enemies were still talking. People publicly criticizing each other were sometimes attempting to negotiate behind closed doors. Efforts at reconciliation existed even while public hostilities intensified. That contradiction fascinated audiences. Because it exposed a reality many viewers never consider. Public conflict and private reality are rarely the same thing. The loudest voices aren't always telling the whole story. And the biggest headlines often conceal what is really happening. The more Megyn talked, the more complicated the situation became. Nothing was as simple as it first appeared. Heroes became flawed. Villains became complicated. Certainties became questions. Questions became mysteries. And the audience found itself pulled deeper into the story than ever before. Then came what many viewers considered the most explosive moment of all. Megyn refused to completely abandon Candace Owens. Even after everything. Even after the controversy. Even after the pressure. She continued defending Candace's right to ask questions. That decision shocked supporters and critics alike. Some viewed it as courage. Others viewed it as recklessness. But regardless of perspective, it proved one thing. Megyn was not going to allow anyone else to dictate her relationships. She would make her own decisions. Draw her own conclusions. And live with the consequences. That independence became one of the defining themes of the entire controversy. Because in a world increasingly divided into opposing camps, refusing to choose a side can sometimes generate more outrage than choosing one. The backlash was immediate. Comment sections exploded. Social media erupted. Critics accused her of enabling dangerous narratives. Supporters praised her for refusing to surrender her independence. The divide grew wider than ever. Yet amid all the noise, one question remained unanswered. Why was everyone fighting so hard? Why were friendships collapsing? Why were reputations being put on the line? Why had this controversy become so emotionally charged? The answer may be simpler than many realize. Because the stakes were never just about a disagreement. They were about trust. And once trust is broken, every interaction becomes suspect. Every motive gets questioned. Every explanation sounds incomplete. That's exactly where the story found itself. Trust had shattered. Relationships had fractured. And nobody seemed capable of putting the pieces back together. But the most astonishing twist was still waiting in the shadows. Because as Megyn continued revealing what she knew, another possibility began emerging. A possibility that could change the entire way audiences understand not only this controversy, but the people at the center of it. And if that possibility turns out to be true, then everything we've discussed so far may only be the beginning. If the revelations themselves weren't dramatic enough, what happened next took the controversy to an entirely different level. The moment Megyn Kelly's comments began circulating online, the reaction was immediate. Social media exploded. Comment sections filled up by the thousands. Podcast clips started spreading across platforms. And suddenly, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Supporters praised Megyn for refusing to be pressured into taking a position she didn't genuinely believe in. Critics accused her of avoiding difficult truths. Others argued she was trying to keep one foot in every camp so she could maintain relationships with everyone involved. No matter where people stood, one thing became impossible to deny. The conversation was getting bigger. Much bigger. What had once been a dispute followed mostly by political media audiences was now attracting attention from people who normally paid little attention to these internal conflicts. Viewers were fascinated by the idea that private conversations had been happening behind the scenes while public battles raged online. Many couldn't stop asking the same question. How much of what we see publicly is actually real? Because Megyn's comments suggested that some of the most important developments were taking place away from cameras. That realization changed how many people viewed the entire situation. Industry insiders were equally divided. Some commentators applauded Megyn's willingness to stay independent. In today's media environment, that isn't always easy. Audiences often reward certainty. They reward strong positions. They reward people who clearly identify allies and enemies. Nuance rarely goes viral. Complicated explanations rarely generate headlines. Yet Megyn appeared determined to resist those pressures. For some media professionals, that earned respect. Others weren't impressed. They argued that neutrality in a controversy of this magnitude wasn't a virtue. In their eyes, refusing to fully condemn certain actions effectively enabled them. That criticism gained traction among people who believed stronger responses were necessary. As a result, the debate gradually shifted away from the original controversy and toward a completely different question. What responsibility do influential media figures have when conflicts erupt inside their own circles? Should they remain neutral? Should they pick a side? Should they actively intervene? Or should they stay out of it entirely? The industry couldn't agree. And that's exactly why the reactions became so intense. The controversy was no longer just about Candace Owens, Erika Kirk, or even Megyn Kelly. It had become a larger debate about journalism, loyalty, friendship, and influence. Every major personality who commented on the situation seemed to interpret it differently. Some focused on the questions being asked. Others focused on the people asking them. Some emphasized accountability. Others emphasized compassion. The divide reflected a broader split that had been growing for years. One side believed difficult questions should never be off limits. The other believed certain lines shouldn't be crossed. Neither side appeared willing to back down. That tension fueled endless discussions. Panel debates. Podcast episodes. Reaction videos. Live streams. For weeks, audiences continued revisiting the same moments, searching for clues hidden inside interviews and statements. Even people who normally ignored media drama found themselves pulled into the discussion. The reason was simple. The story contained everything that captures public attention. Friendships, conflict, power, betrayal, secrets, and perhaps most importantly, uncertainty. People are naturally drawn to mysteries. And this controversy contained plenty of them. Questions remained unanswered. Motives remained unclear. Private conversations remained private. That uncertainty allowed countless theories to emerge. Every new comment generated fresh speculation. Every interview created new headlines. Every reaction produced even more reactions. The cycle became self-sustaining. Meanwhile, audiences began scrutinizing the behavior of everyone involved. Supporters of Candace Owens argued she was being unfairly targeted for asking questions. They viewed the criticism directed at her as evidence that powerful people wanted certain topics avoided. Supporters of Erika saw things very differently. From their perspective, a grieving widow had been forced to endure relentless public scrutiny. They believed stronger defenses were justified. Then there were Megyn Kelly's supporters. Many admired her refusal to completely sever relationships based on public pressure. To them, she represented something increasingly rare: independent judgment. The ability to disagree without declaring war. The willingness to resist demands for total conformity. Whether people agreed with her conclusions or not, they respected the fact that she appeared to reach them herself. That admiration was matched by equally intense criticism. Detractors argued that her position created confusion. They believed her attempts to remain balanced ultimately benefited one side more than the other. As the arguments intensified, another interesting pattern emerged. The controversy started exposing deeper divisions within conservative media itself. Disagreements that had previously remained beneath the surface were suddenly becoming visible. Questions about leadership. Questions about influence. Questions about strategy. Questions about the future direction of the movement. The Erika Candace conflict became a lens through which many people viewed those larger battles. In other words, the controversy wasn't simply reflecting existing tensions. It was amplifying them. That's why industry reactions became so passionate. People weren't just debating a single dispute. They were debating competing visions of what conservative media should become. Some favored unity at almost any cost. Others prioritized independent inquiry regardless of consequences. Some emphasized loyalty. Others emphasized skepticism. Those competing values collided repeatedly throughout the controversy. And every new revelation seemed to widen the divide. Yet perhaps the most fascinating reaction came from ordinary viewers. Many expressed frustration. Not because they had chosen a side, but because they felt they still didn't have the complete story. The more details emerged, the more complicated everything became. Instead of clarity, audiences found themselves facing even more questions. Who was telling the truth? Who was leaving things out? Who was acting in good faith? And who was pursuing entirely different goals? Those unanswered questions kept people engaged. They kept people debating. And they ensured the controversy remained in the spotlight long after many expected it to fade away. Because at its core, this wasn't merely a political story. It was a human story. A story about trust. A story about loyalty. A story about relationships under pressure. And as public reactions continued pouring in from every direction, one thing became increasingly clear. The final chapter of this controversy had not yet been written. In fact, if the latest revelations are any indication, the most surprising twist may still be waiting just around the corner. Just when it seemed like every side of the story had finally been exposed, Megyn Kelly dropped one final revelation that changed the entire conversation. Because after months of public pressure, after endless accusations, after friendships were tested, after audiences demanded answers, Megyn still refused to do the one thing everyone expected her to do. She refused to pick a side. And that might be the biggest twist of all. Think about it. For months, people have been trying to force everyone involved into neat little categories. You're either with Candace, or you're against Candace. You're either defending Erika, or you're attacking Erika. You're either loyal to one camp, or loyal to the other. That's how modern controversies work. Everything gets reduced to teams. Everything becomes a battle. Everything becomes us versus them. But Megyn Kelly never fully accepted those rules. Even after facing criticism from every direction, she continued saying essentially the same thing. She could disagree with Candace without destroying her. She could support Erika without blindly accepting everything. She could remain friends with people who disagreed with each other. And perhaps most importantly, she wasn't going to allow anyone else to decide who she could or couldn't talk to. That position sounds simple. But in today's environment, it's almost revolutionary. Because neutrality has become suspicious. Nuance has become controversial. And refusing to join a side often makes both sides angry. That's exactly what happened. The more Megyn resisted pressure, the more questions began emerging. Was she protecting someone? Was she hiding something? Was she strategically avoiding a direct answer? Or was she simply seeing a reality that others refused to acknowledge? The answer remains unclear. And that's where the story takes its most fascinating turn. Because throughout all of this drama, one uncomfortable fact remains. Megyn Kelly has spoken privately with people most of the public has never heard from. She's been involved in conversations that never became public. She's heard explanations audiences haven't heard. She's witnessed tensions most viewers only know through rumors and speculation. In other words, she knows more than she's saying. A lot more. And that realization has completely transformed how some people view her role in the controversy. What if she wasn't simply reporting events? What if she wasn't merely reacting to developments? What if she was quietly influencing outcomes behind the scenes the entire time? It's a possibility that continues to fuel endless debate. Remember, according to Megyn's own account, Erika trusted her enough to ask for help. That's significant. People don't usually seek mediation from someone they don't trust. That means Megyn wasn't just another commentator watching from a distance. She was someone participants believed could actually affect what happened next. That level of influence raises fascinating questions. How many conversations occurred that the public never saw? How many decisions were shaped behind closed doors? How many conflicts were prevented before they ever reached social media? And perhaps most importantly, how many stories remain untold? Because every time Megyn reveals a new detail, audiences discover another hidden layer beneath the controversy. A private phone call. A forgotten conversation. An unseen disagreement. A relationship operating completely differently than people assumed. The deeper the story goes, the more complicated it becomes. And that's why the final twist isn't really about Candace Owens. It's not really about Erika Kirk. It's not even about Ben Shapiro. The final twist is about uncertainty. After everything that's happened, nobody can confidently say they possess the complete picture. Not the commentators. Not the critics. Not the supporters. Not even the people who've spent months following every development. There are simply too many unanswered questions. Too many private conversations. Too many competing narratives. Too many missing pieces. And that's exactly why this controversy refuses to disappear. Most public scandals eventually fade because the facts become clear. People reach conclusions. The story ends. This one is different. Every answer seems to create two new questions. Every revelation exposes another mystery. Every attempt to close the book only opens another chapter. Even now, audiences remain divided. Some believe Megyn Kelly has demonstrated remarkable independence. Others believe she's avoiding conclusions she doesn't want to confront. Some see wisdom. Others see strategy. Some see courage. Others see calculation. Perhaps that's why her comments generated such a powerful reaction. Because they didn't provide certainty. They challenged certainty. They forced people to reconsider assumptions they thought were settled. And in doing so, they reopened a controversy many believed was nearing its end. But here's the question nobody can seem to answer. What happens next? Will Candace Owens continue pushing forward? Will Erika Kirk eventually address these issues more directly? Will the divisions inside conservative media continue growing? Or will the people involved somehow find a way to move beyond the conflict? Right now, nobody knows. And maybe that's the most revealing detail of all. Because despite countless interviews, endless debates, and months of public scrutiny, the central mystery remains unresolved. The relationships remain complicated. The tensions remain real. And the questions continue piling up. Which brings us to one final possibility. A possibility that could completely reshape everything. What if the most important conversation in this entire saga hasn't happened yet? What if the people at the center of the controversy eventually sit down face to face and reveal what really happened behind closed doors? Because if that day ever comes, if Candace Owens, Erika Kirk, and Megyn Kelly finally put everything on the table, the internet may witness one of the most explosive and revealing discussions in modern political media history. And until that happens, the speculation continues. The questions remain. And the story is far from over. Now I want to hear from you. After everything we've covered in this video, where do you stand? Do you believe Megyn Kelly was genuinely trying to keep the peace between Candace Owens and Erika Kirk? Or do you think she was quietly protecting one side while appearing neutral in public? And what about the biggest question of all? Why do you think so many people seem determined to pressure Megyn into taking a stronger position? Was it really about defending Erika? Or was there something much bigger happening behind the scenes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this story has become one of the most fascinating and divisive controversies we've seen in a long time, and there are strong arguments on every side. I want to know what you think. Do you agree with Megyn Kelly's approach? Do you agree with Candace Owens? Or do you think everyone involved could have handled things differently? Let's have a real discussion. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more deep dives into the biggest stories, hidden details, and behind-the-scenes developments that mainstream outlets often overlook, make sure you hit that like button right now. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload. We are following every new development, every major interview, and every shocking revelation as this story continues to unfold. Trust me, You do not want to miss what's coming next. Because if the recent comments from Megyn Kelly are any indication, there may be even bigger surprises waiting just around the corner. Thanks for watching. Stay curious. Stay informed. And I'll see you in the next video.